This story is titled, Mom and Dad Forced Me to Give My Apartment to My Golden Brother, but when I said not happening, they tried to do it secretly by forging my signature, so I discovered their scheme and warned my lawyer in time. Now they face criminal charges and beg me to drop the lawsuit. Hey Reddit, I'm a 34-year-old guy, and I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd have to fight my own family over a house I bought with my hard-earned money. But here we are, and I wish I could say I'm making this up. They actually tried to steal my house from me, and what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. Let me start from the beginning so you can understand the family dynamic I grew up with. In our household, the hierarchy was crystal clear from day one. My older brother Marcus, who's 39 now, was always the golden child, the firstborn, the heir to everything our parents had built. My parents never even tried to hide this fact or pretend there was any equality between us. They would literally say things like, Marcus will inherit the family home, the money, all of it, right in front of me, as if I wasn't even in the room. Their reasoning was incredibly simple and infuriatingly unfair. He was born first. That was literally their entire justification for the preferential treatment that would define our entire childhood and beyond. I was always the afterthought kid, the one who was supposed to just quietly accept that Marcus got the best of everything while I made do with whatever scraps were left over. For years, I watched this pattern play out in every aspect of our lives, and it never got easier to swallow. Marcus got the bigger bedroom when we were kids, while I was stuck in what was essentially a converted closet. When he turned 16, our parents bought him a brand new car for his birthday. When I turned 16 4 years later, I got student loans paperwork and a bus pass. They paid for his college tuition in full, covering everything from room and board to textbooks and spending money. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs just to keep my head above water financially while drowning in student debt. My best friend Tony has witnessed this family dynamic firsthand since we were in middle school, and he's never been shy about calling it out. Your parents act like Marcus hung the moon and you're just some random neighbor kid they're stuck with, he would tell me regularly. The sad truth was he wasn't wrong at all. This pattern of blatant favoritism continued well into our adult lives, becoming even more pronounced as the financial stakes got higher. When Marcus got married to his wife Jessica, my parents gave them a generous $30,000 gift specifically for the down payment on their first house. It was presented as a wedding gift, but everyone knew what it really was. Another massive financial advantage handed to the golden child. When I asked for similar help with my own home purchase 4 years later, thinking maybe they'd show some consistency in their generosity, I was met with a lecture about fiscal responsibility and pulling myself up by my bootstraps. Apparently, the same rules that applied to Marcus's financial support didn't apply to me. Marcus's career path was equally blessed with parental intervention and favoritism. Right after he graduated from college, my dad made some calls and pulled strings to get him a management position at his friend's construction company. Marcus walked straight into a supervisory role with 0 experience required. No entry-level grunt work. No proving himself from the bottom up like most people have to do. Meanwhile, I started at the absolute bottom rung of a marketing firm, working my way up through countless late nights and weekend projects that nobody else wanted to touch. I spent years grinding away, taking on every difficult assignment and proving my worth through sheer determination and hard work. The most frustrating part was that my dad never even bothered to ask what I did for a living until I'd been doing it successfully for 3 years. Fast forward to last year, when I finally reached a major milestone in my life. After years of busting my ass, working those 60-hour weeks and aggressively saving every penny I could, I had finally saved enough money to buy my own place. It was a 3-bedroom house in Tampa, located in a neighborhood I actually liked and could see myself building a life in. The house needed some work when I bought it, but that didn't deter me at all. I spent 6 months of my free time getting it exactly how I wanted it, pouring my heart and soul into every detail. I completely renovated the kitchen from top to bottom, refinished all the hardwood floors myself, and even converted the garage into a home gym where I could work out without paying monthly fees. This place was 100% mine in every sense of the word. I had bought it with money I earned through 15 years of 60-hour work weeks and aggressive saving habits that meant sacrificing a lot of things other people my age took for granted. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally accomplished something that was just for me. Something with my name on the deed, my rules, my life, with absolutely no family strings attached. At least that's what I naively thought at the time. About 3 months after I moved in and got settled, my parents invited themselves over for dinner. They didn't ask if it was convenient or if I had other plans. They simply announced they were coming over, the way they'd always done throughout my life. During their visit, my dad walked around inspecting everything like he was some kind of building code inspector, making little passive-aggressive comments about the amateur work on my renovations. My mom, meanwhile, kept asking if I was lonely living in such a big house all by myself, as if my single status was some kind of personal failing. After we finished dinner, they sat me down at my own dining room table with these serious, stern expressions that I remembered all too well from childhood lectures about my various shortcomings and disappointments. "Son," my dad said, in that authoritative tone he'd always used when delivering life-changing pronouncements, "your mother and I have been discussing your house situation extensively." I looked at him, confused about what there was to discuss. "We think it would make much more sense for Marcus to take over this property," he continued, as if he was announcing something as simple as a change in dinner plans. I just stared at him, my brain struggling to process what I had just heard. "Excuse me?" I managed to say, thinking I must have misunderstood something fundamental about this conversation. My mom quickly jumped in to provide what she apparently thought was a reasonable explanation for this insane request. "We're just trying to keep the family assets properly managed," she said, with that tone she used when she thought she was being perfectly logical. "Marcus has children who need the space and you're single. It's really just the practical solution when you think about it objectively." I felt my blood pressure rising as the full scope of their audacity began to sink in. "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. "This is my house. I bought it with my money. There's no situation here to discuss." My dad leaned forward in his chair, adopting that intimidation pose that had worked so well when I was 10 years old, but held absolutely no power over me anymore. "We're not trying to take it from you," he said, in a voice that suggested the opposite. "This is about family unity and doing what's best for everyone involved. Marcus would of course let you stay here until you find a smaller, more appropriate place for your needs." Before I could even begin to formulate a response to this ridiculous proposition, I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. Marcus walked into the dining room, and it became immediately clear that he had been listening to this entire conversation from the other room. He had that smug, self-satisfied look on his face that I remembered from childhood, the same expression he'd worn every time our parents had given him something that should have been shared equally between us. "Don't take it personally, bro," Marcus said with fake casualness, as if we were discussing something as mundane as switching seats at a movie theater. "It's just about what makes sense for the family as a whole. You don't really need all this space anyway, and we could really use the room for the kids." I stood up from my chair, feeling the anger building in my chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. "This is my home," I said firmly, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm not signing anything over to you or anyone else. End of discussion." The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees as soon as I said those words. My parents exchanged that look they always shared when I had the audacity not to fall in line with their plans. A mixture of disappointment and irritation that I was being difficult again. They left shortly after that, and it was clear that the evening had been completely ruined for them by my refusal to hand over my property. I spent that entire night pacing around my house, half convinced that I had somehow hallucinated the entire conversation. What kind of family asks you to give up your house? What kind of brother thinks that's a reasonable request to make? The sheer entitlement and audacity of it all was so absurd that I actually found myself laughing out loud, standing alone in my kitchen at midnight, trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, I called Tony, who was really the only person in my life who truly understood my family dynamic because he had witnessed it firsthand for decades. "Dude, I think my family has completely lost their minds," I told him, recounting every detail of the previous night's conversation. "Honestly, I'm not even surprised," Tony said after I finished the story. "Your brother has always thought he was entitled to everything you have, and your parents have always backed him up. Remember when he tried to take your first car when we were 18? I did remember that incident all too well. I had saved money for 2 straight years, working at a grocery store after school and on weekends, just to buy a used car when I turned 18. It wasn't anything fancy, just a reliable vehicle that would get me to work in college. Meanwhile, Marcus had managed to wreck his second car, which was the replacement for the first car our parents had bought him after he totaled that one in a completely avoidable accident. Suddenly, Marcus started talking about how he desperately needed my car for his job, and how it would be better utilized by him. The most infuriating part was that my parents actually backed him up on this ridiculous demand. I only managed to keep that car by threatening to drop out of college entirely and move across the country, which finally made them back down. "Yeah, but this is different," I said to Tony, still trying to wrap my head around the current situation. "This is my house. How could they possibly think I just handed over to them? Tony's response was brutally honest and cut right to the heart of the matter. Because you've never really stood up to them before. Not for keeps anyway. You've complained, you've argued, you've gotten upset, but in the end, you always showed up for holidays and family gatherings. You always played nice to keep the peace. They think you'll fold this time too, just like you always have. He was absolutely right, and hearing it said out loud stung, because it forced me to confront the truth about my own behavior. I had spent decades swallowing my resentment and biting my tongue for the sake of maintaining family harmony. But this time was going to be different, and I was determined to make that clear to all of them. After that initial visit, things escalated much faster than I had expected. My mom started texting me constantly with guilt trips that would have made a professional manipulator proud. Messages like, "Family should support each other," and "Marcus's children deserve a stable home," and "Why are you being so selfish?" started flooding my phone at all hours of the day and night. My dad took a different approach, calling me with long speeches about responsibility to the family name and thinking beyond my own selfish desires. He would go on these monologues about how successful families stay successful by making smart decisions about asset management and keeping wealth within the family structure. Then, my Aunt Claire, who was my mom's sister and equally entitled in her worldview, started calling me as well. "Your cousin gave his starter home to his older brother when he got married," she lectured me during one particularly irritating phone call. "That's what family does when they truly care about each other." I reminded her that her son had been gifted that house by his grandfather in the first place. So it wasn't exactly the same situation as someone being asked to give up a house they had worked for years to afford. She hung up on me mid-conversation, apparently offended by my logical response. But Marcus himself was absolutely the worst part of this entire campaign. He started showing up at my house unannounced with his wife Jessica, who was the human equivalent of a "let me speak to your manager" haircut. They would walk through my house like they already owned it, pointing at things and discussing what changes they would make once the property was officially theirs. "This wall should come down," Jessica would say confidently, tapping on my living room wall with her manicured finger. "We really need an open concept design for entertaining guests." The first couple of times this happened, I tried to remain civil and reasonable, politely reminding them that this was my house and I had no intention of selling or transferring it to anyone. They would just smile and nod at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum that would eventually pass. "We understand that you're attached to the place," Jessica would say in her most condescending tone, the one that made my skin crawl. "Change is always hard for people, but you'll see that this arrangement will work out better for everyone involved." Their kids, who were 7 and 9 years old respectively, were both spoiled, absolutely rotten, and had clearly never been taught to respect other people's property. They would run wild through my house during these unwelcome visits, jumping on my furniture, tracking mud across my newly refinished floors, and messing with my belongings while Marcus and Jessica did absolutely nothing to stop their destructive behavior. "Kids will be kids," Marcus would say with a dismissive shrug whenever I pointed out what his children were doing to my home, as if the destruction of other people's property was some unavoidable force of nature that adults had no control over. Then, one Thursday evening, I came home from my workout at the gym to find Marcus's SUV parked boldly in my driveway. Even worse, I discovered that their entire family was inside my house, having used the spare key I had stupidly kept hidden under a decorative rock near my front door for emergencies. "We were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by," Marcus said casually when I confronted them, acting like breaking into someone's home was perfectly normal behavior. Meanwhile, his kids were literally drawing on my dining room wall with markers they had apparently brought with them for this specific purpose. "Get your kids and get out of my house," I said firmly, my patience completely exhausted. "Right now." Jessica gave me her signature look of practiced outrage, the same expression she probably used on customer service representatives when things didn't go her way. "They're just playing and having fun. Don't be so uptight about everything," she said, as if I was being unreasonable for not wanting children to vandalize my home. I took my spare key back from them immediately and changed all the locks that very same afternoon. Tony came over to help me install the new hardware, and he couldn't believe what was happening. "Dude, this is next-level entitlement," he said as we worked on installing new deadbolts on every exterior door. "You need to start documenting everything that's happening here." Taking his advice seriously, I installed security cameras covering every possible entry point to my house and started keeping detailed written records of every single interaction I had with my family members. I documented dates, times, what was said, what was done, and who was present for each incident. The worst incident of all happened about 4 months after I'd first bought the house. Besides the house itself, my absolute pride and joy was my 1970 Plymouth Cuda, a classic muscle car painted bright orange with the original 440 V8 engine still purring under the hood. I had spent 3 years restoring that car, dedicating countless weekends and late nights in the garage to bringing it back to its former glory. I had invested thousands of dollars in authentic parts and components, and I had done most of the intricate work myself, from completely rebuilding the carburetor to reupholstering the entire interior with period-correct materials. That car represented thousands of hours of my life and was a testament to my dedication to preserving automotive history. I was standing in my kitchen cleaning up after lunch when I heard a strange scraping sound coming from the direction of my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Marcus's 9-year-old son, Brandon, deliberately dragging a large rock along the passenger side of my Cuda, carving a deep, ugly scratch from the headlight all the way back to the taillight. I ran outside with my blood absolutely boiling, unable to believe what I was seeing. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted at the kid, who looked up at me with this smug little smile that was identical to the expression his father had worn throughout our childhood. "It's just a stupid old car," Brandon said with complete nonchalance, still holding the rock in his hand like he was planning to continue his vandalism. That's when I completely lost my composure. I grabbed the rock from his hand and threw it across the yard, then shoved him. Not hard enough to seriously hurt him, but firmly enough that he fell down on his backside, looking shocked that someone had finally stood up to his destructive behavior. "Get the hell away from my car!" I yelled through clenched teeth, angrier than I had been in years. The kid immediately started wailing like I had broken his arm, putting on a dramatic performance that would have impressed professional actors. Marcus and Jessica came running out of my house, followed closely by my parents, who had apparently been inside the whole time, probably planning their next strategy for pressuring me to give up my property. "What is wrong with you?" Jessica screamed at me, scooping up Brandon and cradling him like he was the victim in this situation. "He's just a child. How could you lay your hands on him?" "Your child just caused $3,000 in damage to my car," I said, pointing to the deep gouge in the paint and metal that would require professional restoration to repair properly. "And he did it deliberately, with malicious intent." Marcus stepped up to me with his chest puffed out, trying to use his size to intimidate me the way he had when we were kids. "It's just a car, man. He didn't mean anything by it," he said, completely dismissing the severity of what his son had done. "Are you completely blind?" I shot back. "He did it on purpose. I watched him drag that rock along my car with a smile on his face." My dad put his hand on my shoulder in that patronizing gesture he had always used when he wanted to assert his authority over me. "Son, you need to calm down right now," he said in his most condescending tone. "Kids make mistakes sometimes. You can't put your material possessions above family relationships." I immediately shrugged his hand off my shoulder, having had enough of his fake wisdom. "That's exactly the problem with this family," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "Your golden child and his spawn can destroy whatever they want, and I'm supposed to just take it and smile. He's 9 years old," my mother said, looking at me like I was some kind of monster. "You physically pushed a child to the ground over a scratch on a car." "I pushed a vandal who was destroying my property," I corrected her firmly. "And where were all of you when he was doing it? Sitting inside my house planning your next attempt to steal it from me." My Aunt Claire, who had apparently also been invited to this little family ambush, chimed in from her position on my front porch. "This is exactly why you're not ready for adult responsibilities," she declared with her usual air of superiority. "You can't even control your temper around children." I watched in amazement as my entire family closed ranks against me, all of them glaring at me like I was some kind of criminal rather than the victim of deliberate vandalism. Not one of them, not a single person, acknowledged what Brandon had actually done or offered to pay for the repairs that would be necessary to fix the damage. Instead, they spent the next hour lecturing me about my supposed anger issues and how materialistic I had become. They talked about how disappointed they were in my behavior and how I needed to learn to prioritize family relationships over worldly possessions. After they finally left my property, I stood alone in my driveway, running my fingers along the ugly scratch that Brandon had carved into my Cuda. 3 years of painstaking restoration work had been damaged in a matter of seconds by a kid who knew exactly what he was doing. And somehow I was being portrayed as the villain in this situation. I wasn't about to let this slide, of course. The next morning, I called Marcus directly to address the damage his son had caused. "I want $3,500 for the damage to my car," I told him in a calm but firm voice. "Professional restoration to fix that scratch will cost at least that much." Marcus actually had the audacity to laugh at my request. "You're kidding, right? It's just a scratch. Take it to a body shop and have them buff it out for 50 bucks. This isn't a negotiation, Marcus, I replied. Either you pay for the damage your kid caused, or I'm filing a police report for vandalism and an insurance claim specifically naming Brandon as the perpetrator. He's a minor, you idiot, Marcus said with his characteristic arrogance. Nothing's going to happen to him. Actually, as his parent, you're legally responsible for any damage he causes, I informed him. And I have security footage of him doing it deliberately. This isn't some accident we're talking about. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Marcus responded. I'll give you $500, and that's more than generous for a stupid scratch. $3,500 or I file the police report today, I said. Your choice. He hung up on me without another word. 3 hours after Marcus hung up on me, I followed through on my threat and filed a formal police report for vandalism. I also submitted a claim with my insurance company, explicitly naming Brandon as the perpetrator and documenting that Marcus and Jessica had refused to cover the damages their child had caused. I included detailed statements about the ongoing pattern of harassment and trespassing that my family had been subjecting me to. The police officer who took my report seemed skeptical at first, probably thinking this was just another petty family dispute that would blow over. But his attitude changed when I showed him the clear photographs of the damage to my car and the text message thread with Marcus where he had refused to take responsibility for his son's actions. Family disputes can get pretty messy, the officer said as he finished writing up the report. But property damage is property damage, regardless of who causes it or what their relationship is to you. 2 days later, I received a text message from Marcus that showed he was still completely unrepentant about the whole situation. Got your little police report, he wrote. Good luck getting any cop to care about your family drama. You're just embarrassing yourself at this point. This definitely wasn't over, not by a long shot. Marcus had made it clear that he had no intention of taking responsibility for his family's actions, and my parents continued to act like I was the problem in this entire situation. Then, about 5 months after their initial request for me to hand over my house, Marcus showed up at my front door with what he apparently thought was some kind of peace offering. It was a greeting card from my parents with a sappy message about family legacy and the importance of working together for the greater good. Inside the card was a crude, hand-drawn family tree that looked like something a child might create for a school project. The most insulting part was that my house was sketched in under Marcus's name, as if the transfer of property was already a done deal that just needed to be formalized. There was also a post-it note attached that read, "Just sign the papers, son. It's what's best for everyone involved." The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. They were still acting like my refusal to give them my house was just some temporary stubborn phase that I would eventually get over. I tore up the entire card right in front of Marcus, making sure he could see every piece as it fell to the ground. "Get the hell off my property," I told him firmly. Marcus's face turned bright red with anger, and I could see that his patience with my unreasonable behavior was wearing thin. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be," he said through gritted teeth. "We're trying to be nice about this whole situation." "There's nothing nice about trying to steal someone's house," I replied, not backing down an inch. "It's not stealing when it's family," Marcus said, as if that statement made any logical sense whatsoever. "Think about my kids and what's best for them." "I am thinking about your kids," I shot back. "I'm thinking that they shouldn't be raised by parents who teach them it's perfectly okay to take whatever they want from other people, regardless of who actually owns it." Marcus tried to push past me to get into my house, but I blocked the doorway with my body. "Move," he said, trying to sound threatening and intimidating. "Make me," I replied calmly, standing my ground. For a moment, I genuinely thought he might actually try to throw a punch at me. His hands balled into fists, and his face went from red to an alarming shade of purple. But then he seemed to think better of it, turned around, and stormed off toward his car, shouting over his shoulder that I would regret this decision. After that confrontation, things shifted from merely persistent and annoying to openly hostile and threatening. My family completely closed ranks against me, and I was officially designated as the black sheep for having the audacity to keep my own property instead of handing it over to the golden child. My parents stopped calling me entirely, which was actually something of a relief. The family group chat that had previously included me in discussions about holidays and gatherings went completely silent as far as I was concerned. Holiday plans were made and shared without any mention of me, making it clear that I was no longer considered part of the family unless I was willing to comply with their demands. The family gossip machine went into absolute overdrive, spreading stories about my supposed mental instability and poor decision-making skills. I heard through a cousin that my parents were telling everyone who would listen that I was mentally ill and making irrational choices that were hurting the entire family. They painted themselves as concerned parents trying to help their troubled son, while I was portrayed as an ungrateful child who had lost touch with reality. The only direct messages I received anymore were from Marcus, and they weren't subtle or diplomatic anymore. "You're making a huge mistake," he texted me one evening while I was trying to relax at home. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, this is going to happen." I didn't respond to his threats, but I did add the message to my growing file of documentation that I was keeping for potential legal action. Every threatening text, every incident of trespassing, every act of vandalism was being carefully recorded and stored. Meanwhile, the incidents around my house became more frequent and increasingly destructive. My mailbox was smashed in with what appeared to be a baseball bat, leaving it completely unusable and requiring a full replacement. My carefully maintained garden was trampled and destroyed, with footprints clearly visible in the soil where someone had deliberately walked through and ruined months of work. Someone egged my front door twice within the same week, leaving disgusting residue that was difficult to clean off and stained the wood. Most concerning of all, I discovered that my security cameras had been physically turned away from their intended viewing angles, clearly tampered with by someone who knew what they were doing. I filed police reports for each and every incident, steadily building a paper trail that documented the ongoing harassment campaign against me. The officers at the local precinct recognized me by my third visit, though, unfortunately, not much came of these reports in terms of actual action or consequences. I kept receiving emails with updates like "investigation pending" or "insufficient evidence to proceed with charges." The system seemed to work incredibly slowly, if it worked at all, when it came to this type of domestic harassment. After about 2 weeks of this pattern, one of the more experienced officers took me aside for a private conversation. "Look, man, I get what's happening here," he said with genuine sympathy. "Family disputes can be absolutely brutal, but we've got limited resources, and frankly, smashed mailboxes and vandalized gardens aren't exactly our top priority when we're dealing with violent crimes and drug trafficking. So I'm just supposed to let them continue vandalizing my property with no consequences?" I asked, frustrated by the apparent lack of options. He gave me a knowing look that suggested he'd seen this type of situation before. "Document everything you can and get better security cameras, ones they can't reach or tamper with easily," he advised. "And maybe consider civil options like restraining orders or lawsuits. Sometimes you have to hit people where it really hurts them, and that's usually in their wallets." It was solid, practical advice that made a lot of sense. The next day, I invested in a comprehensive upgrade to my security system, installing cameras mounted high on the house where they would be completely out of reach without a tall ladder. I also added backup battery power systems in case someone tried to cut my electricity to disable the cameras. I replaced my destroyed mailbox with a heavy-duty steel model that I embedded in concrete, making it virtually impossible to damage with hand tools. I also installed motion sensors around my property that would send alerts directly to my phone if anyone set foot on my land. One evening when I came home from work, I discovered Marcus's kids riding their bikes in circles across my front lawn, deliberately digging deep ruts into the grass that I had just reseeded and carefully maintained. Jessica sat in her SUV parked across the street, clearly supervising this destruction but doing absolutely nothing to stop it. I walked over to her car window with my phone already recording. "Get your children off my property right now," I said firmly. She barely looked up from her own phone, acting like I was bothering her with something trivial. "They're just playing around and having fun. It's really not that big of a deal," she said dismissively. "It is a big deal when it's trespassing and destruction of property, and you know it," I replied, continuing to record our conversation. She rolled her eyes dramatically, as if my concern about my own property was somehow unreasonable. "God, you're so dramatic about everything. This is exactly why everyone thinks you're completely unstable." Something about the fact that I was recording our conversation seemed to change Jessica's approach entirely. She suddenly called the kids over with fake sweetness in her voice, putting on a performance of being the responsible parent for the camera. Then she turned back to me with a cold glare that revealed her true feelings. "Marcus is absolutely right about you," she said with venom in her voice. "You're going to regret making this so difficult for everyone." That night, I called Tony to discuss the escalating situation and my growing concerns about what my family might do next. "I think I need to dig deeper into what's really going on here," I told him. "This level of desperation isn't normal, even for my family. There has to be something else driving this behavior." Tony had an idea that proved to be incredibly valuable. "My cousin works at the county records office," he said. Let me see what I can find out about your parents' property and any financial documents that might be publicly available. While I was waiting for Tony to gather intel from his cousin, I decided to take a more proactive approach to understanding the situation. I started checking Marcus's social media accounts more carefully, and I noticed something interesting that I had previously overlooked. For someone who always acted like he was doing incredibly well financially, there were subtle signs of strain that became apparent when you looked closely. The elaborate family vacation that Marcus and Jessica had been planning and posting about for months suddenly disappeared from Jessica's Instagram without any explanation. Marcus's business page, which used to be updated regularly with posts about new projects and company growth, hadn't been updated in several weeks. Their older child, who had been attending an expensive private school that they frequently bragged about, was suddenly enrolled at the local public school instead. I also started remembering that Marcus had been strangely vague about his construction business whenever family members asked how things were going. For the past couple of years, whenever anyone inquired about his work, he would give these generic, non-specific answers about expansion plans and exciting new projects that were supposedly on the horizon. But I realized that I had never actually seen any concrete evidence of these projects or this supposed business success. Something definitely wasn't adding up here. The level of desperation that my family was showing about getting control of my house seemed completely disproportionate to the situation, even considering their usual entitlement and favoritism toward Marcus. He had always been entitled and demanding, but this felt different. This felt like genuine panic rather than simple greed. 2 weeks later, I received one of the most shocking phone calls of my entire life. It came from my bank's mortgage department, and the woman on the line wanted to verify some information about a recent loan application that supposedly included my property as collateral. I haven't applied for any loans, I told her, completely confused about why she was calling me. We have a refinance application on file that lists your property as secondary collateral for a substantial loan, she explained. Our verification process flagged some discrepancies, which is why we're calling to confirm the details. My stomach dropped as the implications of what she was telling me began to sink in. That's completely impossible, I said. I haven't refinanced anything, and I certainly haven't agreed to use my house as collateral for anyone else's loan. There was a pause while she reviewed her paperwork. The application was submitted by Robert and Patricia Harrison, she said, which were my parents' names. I felt like I was going to be sick. They don't own my house, I told her firmly. I'm the sole owner of that property. That's exactly what our verification process flagged as problematic, she confirmed. The documentation they submitted doesn't match our records of actual property ownership. I asked her what kind of documentation my parents had tried to submit to the bank. I can't share all the specific details due to privacy regulations, she said, but it appears they attempted to include your property as part of a family trust arrangement. Our verification process caught the discrepancy when we cross-referenced their claims with actual county records. After I hung up from that devastating phone call, I immediately contacted Tony, who came over to my house that same evening. He brought with him a thick folder of documents that his cousin had managed to pull from public records, and what he had discovered changed everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation. The family estate that my parents had always talked about preserving, the legacy they constantly referenced when justifying Marcus's preferential treatment, was mortgaged to the absolute hilt. Not just once, but 3 separate times over the past decade, with each refinance coinciding perfectly with a major cash injection into one of Marcus's various business ventures, all of which had failed quietly and spectacularly. Tony spread out the documents on my kitchen table like a detective laying out evidence of a crime. Marcus's construction company officially folded 2 years ago, he said, pointing to the dissolution paperwork. His real estate investment group was dissolved after some kind of lawsuit that I couldn't find all the details about. And that sports bar he opened with such fanfare? It closed within 8 months of opening its doors. Each business failure had been carefully covered up by my parents, who had taken out more and more equity from their home to fund Marcus's next venture. They had been essentially using their house as a personal ATM to bankroll his entrepreneurial disasters, and now they were facing the inevitable consequences. There's more, Tony said grimly, pointing to the most recent documents his cousin had uncovered. They're currently 6 months behind on their mortgage payments. The bank has already started formal foreclosure proceedings. Suddenly, everything made perfect sense. They weren't after my house because of some sacred family tradition, or because they genuinely believed Marcus deserved it more than I did. They needed my property desperately to bail themselves out of the financial ruin they had created by repeatedly bankrolling Marcus's failures. As we continued digging through the county records and publicly available loan documents, we discovered something even more disturbing and potentially criminal. My parents had recently attempted to take out a brand new loan using falsified documents that claimed they actually owned my house as a secondary property. The bank's verification process had caught the fraud attempt, but the fact that they had tried it at all was shocking. "Here's exactly how they tried to do it," Tony said, pointing to a notarized document that made my blood boil. "They created a fake family trust dated 3 years ago, listing all family properties including your address. The problem is, you didn't even own your house 3 years ago, so the timeline doesn't make any sense." The document showed that they had backdated everything and included what appeared to be a forged version of my signature, listing me as a trustee of this fictional family trust. Then, they had attempted to file a quitclaim deed that would transfer their supposed portion of my house to use as collateral for a substantial loan. The fraud attempt was documented in black and white, with my address and property details clearly listed, but with my name replaced by theirs on the actual loan applications. Most damning of all, Jessica's signature appeared as a witness on several of the documents, proving that she wasn't just a passive bystander in this scheme. She was actively involved in the attempted theft. I felt physically sick reading through all the paperwork, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the sheer incompetence of their criminal attempt. Did they really think that banks wouldn't verify property ownership before approving a major loan? Did they honestly believe I wouldn't notice if my house suddenly became part of their loan collateral? The desperation behind their actions was obvious, but the stupidity was equally apparent. Armed with this overwhelming evidence of attempted fraud, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in real estate crimes and identity theft. She agreed to meet with me at her office the following week, and I brought along my thick 3-ring binder filled with evidence: photos, text messages, emails, property records, loan documents, and police reports. The lawyer took her time carefully reviewing everything I had compiled, occasionally making notes and asking clarifying questions about specific incidents. After spending nearly an hour going through my documentation, she leaned back in her chair with a serious expression. "This is actually pretty straightforward from a legal perspective," she told me. "They've attempted loan fraud, identity theft, and document forgery. We have multiple options for how to proceed, and all of them are quite strong." "What would you recommend?" I asked, eager to understand my choices. She considered the question carefully before responding. "Well, the nuclear option would be to press full criminal charges against all parties involved. Based on the evidence you've provided, they could face serious jail time for the forgery and fraud attempts. The penalties for this type of financial crime are quite severe." I nodded, taking in the gravity of the situation. "And what about civil options?" "The civil route would involve filing for restraining orders against all parties to prevent further harassment," she explained. "We could follow that up with a comprehensive lawsuit for damages, attempted theft of property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The monetary damages alone could be substantial." I found myself considering the implications of both approaches. "And if I wanted to keep this somewhat contained within the family?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I was still trying to protect people who had shown me no loyalty whatsoever. "You could use this evidence as leverage," she suggested. "Threaten to pursue both criminal and civil action unless they meet certain non-negotiable conditions, such as leaving you and your property alone permanently and ceasing all forms of contact and harassment." I thought about it carefully. Despite how angry I was, and despite the fact that they absolutely deserved whatever consequences came their way, the idea of my parents actually going to jail didn't sit well with me. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because it would create a family explosion that would drag on for years and potentially affect other relatives who weren't involved in this mess. What I really wanted was for this nightmare to be over completely, not prolonged indefinitely through a lengthy criminal trial and family drama. "Let's prepare documentation for all possible options," I told her. "Draw up the paperwork for both criminal charges and a comprehensive civil lawsuit, but hold off on actually filing anything. I want to try one more direct approach first." The next time Marcus showed up at my house unannounced, my upgraded security system alerted me to his presence before he even reached my front door. I opened the door before he could try the handle, ready for whatever confrontation he had planned. "Trespassing again, Marcus? That's a pretty bold move considering I already have a thick stack of police reports with your name all over them," I said calmly. He tried to push past me into my house, but I blocked the doorway completely. "We need to talk about this situation," he said with obvious frustration. "No, we really don't," I replied firmly. "Everything goes through my lawyer now. I'm done having direct conversations with any of you." "Lawyer? Don't be ridiculous about this. This is family business, not some legal matter, he said, still trying to maintain the fiction that their behavior was somehow normal. Cut the bullshit already, I said, dropping any pretense of politeness. Family, my ass. You tried to steal my house and commit identity theft using my name. The security camera is recording this entire conversation, by the way. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw genuine fear flash across Marcus's face. The confidence and arrogance that had defined his approach to this situation suddenly evaporated, and he seemed to realize that I had more information than he had expected. He retreated to his car without saying another word. The next day, I had my lawyer send formal cease and desist letters to my parents, Marcus and Jessica, and Aunt Claire. The letters detailed all the evidence we had collected about their harassment campaign and attempted fraud, and warned that any further contact, trespassing, or interference would result in immediate legal action with no additional warnings. The response to these letters was swift and revealed just how panicked they were becoming. My mother called me in tears, claiming that they had never meant any harm and that this was all just a big misunderstanding. My father sent a lengthy email full of bluster and indignation, claiming that I was drastically overreacting to what he characterized as normal family discussions about property management. Marcus didn't contact me directly, but I heard through another cousin that he was telling anyone who would listen that I had completely lost my mind and was making up malicious lies about the family to avoid my responsibilities as a son and brother. The most telling aspect of all these responses was what they didn't contain. None of them, not a single one, actually denied the fraud attempt. They deflected, they minimized, they played the victim, but they never once claimed that they hadn't tried to use my property as loan collateral without my knowledge or consent. 2 days later, I received a group text message from my mother that perfectly captured the family's continued delusion about their ability to control me. Family meeting scheduled for Sunday at 2 p.m., the message read. Attendance is mandatory for all family members. I spent the next 4 days meticulously organizing all of my evidence with my lawyer's assistance. We compiled everything into a comprehensive presentation binder with clearly labeled dividers: property ownership documents, harassment timeline, financial fraud evidence, and vandalism documentation. Every text message, email, and photograph was neatly arranged and timestamped to create an undeniable record of their behavior. I decided to attend their mandatory family meeting, but I came prepared. Tony agreed to wait in his car down the street as backup in case the situation escalated beyond my ability to handle it safely. When I arrived at my parents' house, the entire extended family was there, clearly assembled as some kind of intervention force. My parents were there, of course, along with Marcus and Jessica and their kids. Aunt Claire had also been recruited, along with a couple of cousins who had obviously been brought in as reinforcements to pressure me into compliance. My dad started the meeting with his usual patriarchal speech about family unity, loyalty, and the importance of respecting your elders. My mom followed up with tearful comments about how I was single-handedly tearing the family apart with my selfishness and stubborn refusal to do what was best for everyone. I let them finish their entire prepared presentation without interrupting. Then I calmly placed my thick evidence binder on the coffee table where everyone could see it. I know about the mortgages, I said in a calm, steady voice that cut through all their emotional manipulation. I know about the loan fraud attempt using my property as collateral. I know about the foreclosure proceedings that are already underway. I know everything. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop as the reality of what I was saying sank in. Marcus's face drained of all color, transforming from his usual confident smugness to genuine terror. My mother stopped mid-sob, her mouth hanging open in shock. I received a call from the bank, I continued, maintaining my composed tone while watching their reactions carefully. They were very interested in discussing the falsified loan applications that listed my property as collateral for loans I never applied for or authorized. My father tried desperately to regain control of the situation and salvage their narrative. This is all just a big misunderstanding, he said, but his voice lacked its usual authority and conviction. 3 separate mortgages taken out over the past decade to fund Marcus's failed businesses isn't a misunderstanding. I cut him off sharply. Forging documents to secure a loan using my house as collateral without my knowledge or consent isn't a misunderstanding. It's fraud, and it's a federal crime. Marcus stood up abruptly, pointing an accusatory finger at me with barely controlled rage. You ungrateful little… Sit down, I said firmly, not raising my voice but making it clear that I was in control of this conversation now. I'm not finished explaining the situation to everyone. I've already filed a detailed police report documenting the vandalism to my car, I continued. I've documented every single instance of trespassing, every threat, every intrusion on my property. I have a paper trail that's a mile long, and I'm fully prepared to press criminal charges on all of it." At that moment, the doorbell rang, interrupting my presentation. My father looked relieved at the distraction, probably hoping it would derail my momentum and give them a chance to regroup. But his relief was short-lived when the door opened and Uncle Frank walked into the room. Uncle Frank was my dad's brother who had deliberately kept his distance from family drama for years, preferring to stay out of the petty squabbles and power struggles that seemed to define our family gatherings. He looked grim and determined as he surveyed the room. "Sorry I'm late to this little gathering," he said, then looked directly at Marcus with obvious disgust. "I got your message about needing more money to handle your current situation, but I thought it would be better to discuss it here in front of everyone." Marcus's eyes widened in panic. "Uncle Frank, this really isn't the appropriate time or place for that conversation," he said quickly, clearly trying to prevent whatever Uncle Frank was about to reveal. But Uncle Frank wasn't having any of it. "I think this is exactly the right time and place for this discussion," he said firmly. "I've loaned you $85,000 over the past 4 years, money you swore was for legitimate business investments, money you promised repeatedly to repay with interest." The room erupted into chaos as multiple family members tried to talk over Uncle Frank. But he raised his voice and continued his revelation. "Now I find out that you've been soliciting loans from half a dozen other family members and friends, including attempting to use your brother's property as collateral without his knowledge." Uncle Frank turned to address me directly. "I should have warned you years ago about what was happening with Marcus's finances, but your father begged me to keep quiet about it. He said it would destroy the family if Marcus's business failures became public knowledge." "But enough is enough," Uncle Frank declared. "I've been quiet for too long while this financial shell game destroyed multiple relationships and put innocent people at risk." Marcus was sputtering, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative and minimize the damage from Uncle Frank's revelations. "Uncle Frank is exaggerating the situation," he said weakly. "I've had some temporary cash flow issues with my businesses, but that's completely normal in the construction industry." "You've had cash flow issues for an entire decade," Uncle Frank interrupted with obvious frustration. "You've never paid back a single dime to anyone in this family, despite making countless promises and signing promissory notes. Your businesses fail consistently because you siphon all the investment money into your personal accounts instead of actually running legitimate operations." Uncle Frank pulled out a folder of his own documents. "I've seen the financial records, Marcus. I know exactly how you've been operating, and it's essentially a one-man Ponzi scheme using family members as your victims." My mother had gone ghost white at this point, looking back and forth between Marcus and Uncle Frank like she was watching a tennis match that would determine her entire future. The carefully constructed family narrative that had protected Marcus for so many years was crumbling in real time. I seized the moment to present my ultimatum. "I have 2 options for all of you," I announced, making sure I had everyone's complete attention. "Option 1. I file formal criminal charges for everything," I said, letting the weight of those words sink in. "Loan fraud, identity theft, attempted property theft, criminal vandalism, and ongoing harassment. The bank will freeze all accounts while they conduct their investigation. The house goes into immediate foreclosure. Marcus and Dad will very likely face criminal charges that could result in substantial jail time." Aunt Claire audibly gasped at the mention of potential jail time. Jessica started crying, probably realizing for the first time that her involvement in the document forgery could have serious legal consequences for her as well. "Option 2, I continued, maintaining my calm tone while delivering what was essentially an ultimatum. "You all leave me completely alone from this point forward. No phone calls, no visits, no text messages, no more lectures about family tradition or responsibility. No more demands of any kind regarding my property or my life choices." I paused to make sure they understood the finality of what I was proposing. "My house remains mine, and you all stay away from it and from me forever. No exceptions, no special circumstances, no emergency contact." My mother found her voice, though it had lost all of its usual manipulative edge. "You can't just cut off your entire family," she said, but she sounded defeated rather than demanding. "Watch me," I replied without hesitation. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning to decide which option you prefer. If I don't receive clear confirmation that you've chosen option 2, I'll assume you want me to proceed with option 1. I stood up to leave, but Marcus blocked my path to the door, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "You think you're so smart," he hissed at me. "You've always been jealous of what I have, and now you're trying to destroy everything out of spite." I actually laughed in his face at the absurdity of his accusation. "Jealous of what exactly?" I asked. Your failed businesses? Your mountain of debt that's about to destroy our parents' retirement? Your complete inability to support your own family without constantly begging for bailouts? Move out of my way, I said firmly. As I reached the door to leave, my father called out one last desperate attempt to maintain his authority. Son, please. We can work this out like reasonable adults. There has to be a middle ground here. I turned back to face him one final time. You had years to work this out, I said. Every single time there was a choice to make, you chose Marcus over treating your children equally. Now I'm choosing myself for once in my life. Uncle Frank followed me outside to the driveway, and we walked toward our cars together. I'm filing my own legal claim against Marcus, he told me quietly. I've got canceled checks, promissory notes, and documented loan agreements for everything. I should have done this years ago instead of letting it continue. Why didn't you take action sooner? I asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Family loyalty, he said with a bitter laugh, which turns out to be the stupidest reason in the world to let someone rob you blind while you watch it happen. As we reached our cars, Uncle Frank handed me another folder. These are copies of every loan I gave Marcus over the years, complete with dates and his written promises about repayment schedules. Use them if you need additional evidence for your case. I nodded gratefully. Thanks for coming today and speaking up. That took a lot of courage. I should have done it a long time ago, he replied with obvious regret. The next morning, I received a text message from my mother that simply read, "We choose option 2." It was exactly what I had expected them to say, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they would actually follow through on their promise without legal enforcement. But here's the thing. I had already decided that their choice didn't matter anymore. I didn't respond to my mother's text message. Instead, I contacted my lawyer and instructed her to begin the legal process immediately, regardless of their supposed agreement to my terms. I had her file all the documentation about the attempted fraud with the bank, a comprehensive civil claim for damages to my car against Marcus and Jessica as the parents responsible for their child's actions, and a formal request for restraining orders against all immediate family members involved in the harassment campaign. Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with all of this? My lawyer asked during our final planning meeting. They've technically agreed to your terms and promised to leave you alone. They've agreed to things before and broken those agreements, I told her firmly. I'm not taking any chances this time. File everything and make sure it's all legally binding and enforceable. After that decisive action, things went quiet for a considerable period. I kept checking my mailbox regularly for court dates, legal responses, or any other developments related to the various filings. But the legal system moves at its own deliberate pace. Weeks gradually turned into months with no dramatic developments. Life continued, and in many ways improved significantly. I doubled down on my work performance, picking up extra projects and earning a reputation as the guy who could solve complex problems that nobody else wanted to tackle. The promotion I had been chasing for 2 years finally came through. Senior Marketing Director with a substantial 20% salary increase and valuable stock options. When my boss announced the promotion, he specifically cited my methodical approach to handling complex, multifaceted problems as the primary reason for his decision. If he only knew how much practice I'd been getting with problem solving in my personal life, he might have been even more impressed. I also focused intensively on my house during this peaceful period, finally completing all the renovation projects I had originally planned when I first bought the property. I installed a completely new roof, updated all the plumbing throughout the house, and added smart home features that allowed me to control everything from lighting to temperature to security systems from my phone. The place was steadily becoming exactly what I had envisioned when I first walked through it as a potential buyer. Every improvement I made felt like another step toward true independence and self-sufficiency. 4 months after our dramatic family confrontation, I received a plain manila envelope in my mailbox that contained some very satisfying news. Inside was an official court judgment for the damage to my car. Marcus and Jessica were ordered to pay the full $3,500 in repair costs, plus an additional $800 in legal fees. Of course, the judgment didn't automatically come with an enforcement mechanism, so actually collecting that money would likely require another legal battle. But having the official court ruling that validated my claims felt like a significant victory in itself. Around the same time, I heard through the extended family grapevine that Uncle Frank had also won his legal case against Marcus. The court had awarded him the full $85,000 he had loaned to Marcus over the years, plus accumulated interest and legal fees that brought the total judgment to well over $90,000. According to my cousin Dave, who had attended the court hearing out of curiosity, Marcus had shown up to court completely unprepared and apparently expecting that their family connection would somehow save him from having to repay the loans. He had tried to claim that the money from Uncle Frank was actually a series of gifts rather than loans. But Uncle Frank's meticulous documentation of promissory notes and repayment agreements proved otherwise. Dave told me that Marcus had looked genuinely shocked when the judge ruled against him, as if he had never seriously considered the possibility that there would be real consequences for his financial irresponsibility. Through the same family grapevine, I learned that things were falling apart rapidly for Marcus and Jessica in other areas of their lives as well. Marcus's latest business venture had quietly closed its doors without any public announcement or explanation. There was no dramatic bankruptcy filing or newspaper coverage, just a simple "for lease" sign that appeared in the window one day where his office used to be. Jessica lost her position at the real estate firm where she had worked for several years. Again, this wasn't some public firing with drama and accusations. Instead, she simply updated her LinkedIn profile with a vague message about seeking new opportunities and exploring different career paths. Word through the family network was that someone had mentioned the attempted mortgage fraud to her boss, and she was quietly let go to avoid any potential association with financial impropriety that could damage the firm's reputation. My parents began dodging phone calls from various family members and friends they had borrowed money from over the years to fund Marcus's ventures. They stopped showing up at the country club where they had been members for decades, apparently unable to afford the monthly fees anymore. Their cars disappeared from their driveway and were replaced by much older, less expensive models. The foreclosure on their house proceeded without any fanfare or family drama. It was just a quiet listing that appeared on the county website, followed weeks later by a realtor's sign planted in their front yard. The restraining order I had requested was finally granted after 2 rescheduled court hearings and a substantial amount of paperwork. When the official notice arrived in my mailbox, it felt somewhat anticlimactic after all the buildup. It was just a legal document stating that my family members were now legally required to stay at least 500 feet away from me and my property at all times. 6 months after our big family confrontation, I received a voicemail from Marcus that showed just how desperate his situation had become. His voice was subdued and defeated, completely lacking his usual bluster and arrogance. "Hey, it's me," the message began. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me right now, but things are really tight for us at the moment. We're staying with Jessica's parents temporarily, but that situation isn't going well at all. The kids are having a hard time adjusting to everything that's happened." There was a long pause in the recording before he continued. "I was wondering if maybe we could work something out between us. You know, family helping family during difficult times." I deleted the voicemail without responding or giving it a second thought. The bank formally charged my parents with attempted loan fraud based on the evidence I had provided. They managed to avoid actual jail time, but they received substantial probation sentences and hefty financial penalties that they could barely afford given their already dire circumstances. More importantly to them, their reputations in the community, which they had always been obsessed with maintaining, were completely destroyed. Word spread quickly through their social circles about the fraud attempt and the foreclosure, and they became social pariahs virtually overnight. I unexpectedly ran into my mother at the grocery store about 6 months after everything had settled legally. She looked at least 10 years older than when I had last seen her, wearing clothes I didn't recognize that appeared cheaper and more worn than anything she would have chosen in the past. She started to approach me when she first spotted me in the store, but then stopped abruptly, apparently remembering the restraining order that legally prevented her from coming within 500 feet of me. Instead, she called out across the grocery store aisle in a voice that carried a mixture of desperation and entitlement. "Son, we need help," she said loudly enough for other shoppers to hear. "We have nowhere to go and no way to support ourselves." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in her changed appearance and defeated posture. She seemed genuinely confused by my lack of immediate sympathy and concern. "We're family," she added, as if that simple statement should override everything that had happened between us. "No," I said calmly but clearly. "We're not." "But we have nowhere to go," she repeated, apparently unable to process my rejection of her appeal for help. I felt no pity or sympathy as I responded. After making me fight for every scrap of respect and equality my entire life, after watching me work 3 jobs to put myself through college while you paid Marcus's tuition in full, after trying to steal the one thing I built for myself through years of hard work, you expect me to bail you out now?" Her face hardened as she realized that her guilt trip wasn't going to work. "After everything we did for you growing up?" she said with obvious resentment. I actually cut her off with a laugh at the absurdity of her claim. Shut up. Don't you dare try to claim that you did anything meaningful for me. You gave me nothing but suffering and disappointment. Wow, I didn't know you had become this heartless, she said, playing her final card of moral superiority. Goodbye, Mom, I said with finality, and walked away without looking back. I watched her walk away through the store and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no regret about the severed relationship. My last direct interaction with Marcus came about 9 months after everything had gone down. He showed up at my workplace, having somehow discovered the location of my office building. Security called up to my floor to warn me that someone claiming to be my brother was in the lobby, causing a disturbance and demanding to see me. I went down to the lobby to find Marcus looking nothing like his former confident self. The swagger and arrogance that had defined his personality for as long as I could remember had given way to a defeated slouch. But even in his diminished state, I could see that the underlying sense of entitlement was still there, just barely below the surface. "Just give me 5 minutes," he said when he saw me approach. "That's all I'm asking for." I pointed to the security guard who was watching our interaction carefully. The restraining order specifies 500 feet minimum distance. This lobby is about 15 feet from where I'm standing. Do you really want to add violation of a court order to your growing list of legal problems? "I'm trying to make things right between us," he insisted, his voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "We're brothers. That has to count for something. We share DNA, and that's it," I replied coldly. "That's the only connection between us." "Mom and Dad are going to lose everything," he said, making one final attempt to appeal to whatever family loyalty might remain. "They'll be living on the street soon if someone doesn't help them." "So what?" I responded without any trace of sympathy. "Jesus, man, have some kind of heart. They're our parents," he said, apparently genuinely shocked by my indifference to their situation. I stared at him for a moment before responding. "It's funny how family only matters to you people when you need something from someone else. You didn't care about family when your kid was vandalizing my car. You didn't care about family when you were trying to steal my house. You didn't care about family when you were forging documents with my name on them. I made mistakes, okay? I admit that," he said, finally acknowledging some level of responsibility. "But they're going to lose everything they've worked for their entire lives." "They already lost everything," I replied matter-of-factly. "They lost it by choosing to back you financially instead of treating their children equally. They lost it by mortgaging their future to fund your endless series of business failures." Marcus actually had the audacity to look offended by my response. "So that's what this is really about? You're punishing them because you think they love me more than you?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm protecting myself from people who tried to steal from me and commit fraud using my identity. It's really that simple." As security began escorting him toward the exit, he shouted back at me one final time. "You'll regret this decision. Family is all you have in the end." I went back to my office, closed the door, and thought about what he had said. Family is all you have in the end. Maybe that was true for some people, but it certainly wasn't true for me. After that encounter, I didn't hear from any of them again. The next few months passed peacefully and productively. I received another promotion at work, finally finished all the renovations on my house, and even started dating someone who understood and respected personal boundaries. On weekends, I would take my restored Cuda out for long drives, the engine running like the powerful machine it was designed to be. Sometimes Tony would come along for these drives, and occasionally Uncle Frank would join us as well. That's the thing I've learned about family. It's never really about blood relationships or shared genetics. True family is about mutual respect, support, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The people who tried to take what was mine and destroy my financial security weren't my family in any meaningful sense. They were thieves who happened to share my last name. My house, my car, my life. I earned every bit of it through my own hard work and determination. No one gets to take that away from me, regardless of what they call themselves, or what claims they think they have on my property or my future.